Okay, let's talk Snow Patrol.
Literally, I was like, whoa, that is crazy.
Volume slowly goes up.
I was so wrong. It sounded awful.
Yeah, didn't know what that was. Still don't.
You'll get there.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Not in the Background podcast, your weekly dose of music recommendations and music talk. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the band Snow Patrol, the UK indie scene sweethearts. I'm sure if you're from the UK, you would have heard of them. However, if you're from elsewhere in the world, I know I've got a listener from the Philippines and a listener from Ghana. Maybe you haven't heard of them, and I am looking forward to telling you about them because they are great and have been around for a very long time. So Snow Patrol is I think it's fair to say indie rock band, British indie rock band that has been around since 1994. They were formed in 1994. They were originally called Shrug, and then they decided to change their name because they thought there would be some conflicts between their name and then some American bands also called Shrug. So I went, okay, cool, let's switch it up, let's do something different. So they actually changed their name to Polar Bear, and then for the same reasons, thought about the potential conflicts and decided to switch it up and eventually settled on the name Snow Patrol, which they have stuck with for the preceding 20, 30 years after that. Band consists of lead singer and guitarist Gary Lightbody, guitar and backing vocals from Nathan Connolly, and the current drummer is a guy called Ash Sohan. Ash Sohan? I'm reading this off of my notes page to make sure I've got the names correct, but hopefully I've got that correct, but that tells you the band lineup right now. That gives you a bit of a context of who the band are. They have that indie rock sound and have consistently had that. I'm going to talk about a couple of different albums because despite the indie rock sound, there's a lot of nuance in their albums. Their latest album was their first in, I believe it was 7 years, and it has a very different sound to their earlier work. It still keeps the Snow Patrol sound, the kind of iconography from them that you learn to love and get from them over the years, but it just has something new to it. So I want to talk about one of their earlier, probably most famous albums, and then I'm going to move on and talk about their latest album, which is called The Forest is the Path. But first of all, I want to talk about the album Eyes Open. If you're a fan of Snow Patrol, or if you've watched any Children in Need, any sort of charity show with a video vignette of some of the horrible things that go on in the world, you'll have come across a Snow Patrol song from this album. The song Chasing Cars was on this album, and it is a very well-known song, and it was, at least when I was a kid, across every kind of video vignette within a charity show, because it's a very slightly haunting song. It's a beautiful song, but it's very dark, and I think it captures the mood of that sort of thing. You know, at the end of the day, music can be fun, music can be sad, music can be uplifting, and it can also be quite dark. Sometimes all those things happen in the exact same song. But yes, it was always used as kind of an anthem for those things because it really, I suppose, captured the sort of sad and slightly melancholy feelings of what goes on in our world. There's a lot of good things in our world, but there's also a lot of bad, and music can be an accompaniment through everything in that process. But yeah, that's probably the most famous song off the album. However, start to finish, it's fantastic. You get a variety of this indie rock sound. There's nothing that sounds the same. There's difference in every song, in the lyrics, in the structure of the songs, and you get something different as you're going through it. I think that's one of the things with Snow Patrol that I've loved. Like, I've loved them since I was a kid, and I absolutely adored their latest album, arguably my favorite album of theirs. And one of the things that you find with them is that they are so consistent, but whilst being consistent, they're not the same. It's very easy. I've said this before. It's not very easy, but when you find your sound, it can be less of a challenge to keep within the sort of same chord progressions and the same type of sound rather than branch out. Another band I'll talk about eventually is a band called Biffy Clyro, and they kind of follow a similar thing, really, which is there's such difference between their earlier stuff to then their stuff from 15 years ago to then their most recent stuff, but there's a consistent Biffy Clyro sound, and Snow Patrol are like that as well. So you can listen to this album Eyes Open from 20 years ago, and then you can listen to their latest album and it's undeniably Snow Patrol, but there's something different there. So you can get something different from the albums. You're not getting the same thing. And so with this album, like I said, from start to finish, it's great. There's a couple of songs on there which really capture that. One of the things that Snow Patrol are really good at is capturing that slightly dark, slightly melancholy vibe, which can be hard to do, to be honest. I think it's easier to, in terms of from a songwriting perspective, I feel like it's probably easier to get in touch with the positive side, because to get in touch with the dark side of yourself, you have to be slightly introspective, and you have to go sometimes to places that maybe you don't want to go to. When actors talk about being method actors, they have to go to places that they don't necessarily want to go to. And that's one of the beautiful things about art. And Snow Patrol seem to go to that place quite a lot. There's 2 songs off of this first album, Eyes Open, which really hit that point. First is called Make This Go On Forever. And the backing track of it, the instrumental, isn't that complicated. It just builds and flows in this beautiful way. It starts off quite slow with a little bit of piano in the background and just Gary singing on top. Then the chorus builds up into this almost chant, and then it drops back down into just Gary singing over the piano, and it builds up to this really incredible crescendo, and then finishes off with some nice piano at the end and then goes out. So it really takes you on this journey. I love songs that take you on a journey whilst it keeps consistent with the slightly dark theme that goes through. One of the really cool things about this song as well, so I've known this song for a very long time. I saw Snow Patrol for the first time early last year. They played the O2 Arena in London. And when they did this song, Make This Go On Forever, at the end of it, when they'd got into that part, they went into a different part of the song which is not recorded. And the piano kind of came into a slightly happier, built-up, uplifting piano. Then all the rest of the band came in, and they had this real big, different crescendo to the song. One of the cool things about it is that the piano chords really sounded like the chords from Everything Now by Arcade Fire. And I immediately looked at it and was watching it and saw Gary kind of with his eyes closed at the front of the stage and the band's playing around him, and there's a real atmosphere to it. And then as I listened to the chords, I sort of turned to my girlfriend and was like, that really sounds like the Arcade Fire Everything Now. And it was really cool to see, because I love Arcade Fire. I'll probably talk about some of their albums a bit later on in another episode of the podcast, but hearing that slight combination of another indie rock band and also just the chords and how different they are, because within this song it helps capture that dark atmosphere, but within the Arcade Fire song, Everything Now is a very happy song. It's a very upbeat song. There's flute in there. There's all this. They're just completely contrasting, but hearing the piano chords done in what's a similar way, but for a completely different effect, was really cool. And another thing that I like about music, which is at the end of the day, you can't reinvent the wheel. You can't pretty much done every chord progression, every type of this, every type of that. But it's all about the intent and how you use it. And when you see a band use what sounds like a similar chord progression with the piano, but capture a completely different energy, is, amazing. I don't think Snow Patrol do anything particularly unusual. I think they just make solid songs that they almost vibe about within the songs to go to different places, but you always feel like you're on the same route. It's like driving along in a car but stopping off at a petrol station or a gas station in America, and then getting back in the car and then driving on and jumping out to take a photo of like a nice landscape or something. You're still on the same journey, but along that journey you make a few different pit stops. And that's how I describe listening to a Snow Patrol album. So that kind of captures what you get from that first album of theirs. There's another song afterwards which is immediately afterwards, called Set Fire to the Third Bar, with singer Martha Wainwright. And it just builds on that dark vibe from the previous song, Make This Go On Forever, in a very different way. She sort of reminds me, her vocals remind me a bit of Kate Bush. I don't even have the words to describe what the type of vocal is, but there's a slightly, let's say, like witchy aspect to it. I don't know if the word witchy is the right word, but I can't think of the word to capture it. But it's a really specific type of vocal that invokes a really specific type of emotion. And there's a lot of Kate Bush in how she sings that's really able to invoke that kind of emotion, and it's similar to Martha Wainwright. Have a listen and tell me what you think. I think maybe witchy is the wrong word. It's, spellbinding maybe is a better word. It's that slightly kind of ethereal vocal sound that, just like I said, invokes a certain kind of emotion. But yeah, that across the band, the album Eyes Open, tells you a bit about the journey they go on. As now, for the next part, we're going to talk about the latest album, which is called The Forest is the Path, as I mentioned earlier. And this is along the same Snow Patrol line, what I said about that journey and making the pit stops along the way. But it's very much more of a bit more uplifting, I'd say. There's a lot more uplifting songs on there. You sort of take the line between the light and the dark, the Jedi and the Sith, and then some Snow Patrol albums jump more to the Sith side and some jump more to the Jedi side. And I feel like this is more of a Jedi side album. The album artwork is already colourful. The album artwork to Eyes Open is very abstract looking. And the songs have more of a uplifting vibe to them. I discovered this album in early 2025. I think I can't remember how I came across it. It might have just been one of the singles come out from it, and then I went from there. I think it might have been the single All that came out, and then I watched the music video and went from there. But it really blew me away, because I say it's the first album in 7 years, so I hadn't thought about or listened to Snow Patrol in quite a long time. And so I had this album on repeat constantly for weeks. It was just incredible. It felt like, he wrote a book, Gary Lightbody wrote a book along with the album. And, arguably when you listen to the lyrics, it feels like you're sort of being taking on different chapters of a story anyway. But there felt a real artistic level of expression to it. And there's certain lyrics within the songs, which I'll talk about now, which I feel like really capture that. I said about last week, if you haven't seen last week's episode on Spirit Box, about one of the things that Spirit Box do well is they can explain, a complicated human emotion, but in a simple way, but not so simple that it's diluted down, just that it's simple enough to still get it across whilst sounding poetic. And I think that Snow Patrol are another example of this. For example, in the chorus of the song All, which was one of the singles off of the album, the chorus at the end of it says, "It wasn't that I wasn't feeling anything, more like feeling everything at once." And for me, that's such a human thing of sometimes all of the overwhelming things that happen in life you almost don't feel it, but in other situations you do feel it. And it's this line between the two of those. So when he's saying it wasn't that I wasn't feeling anything, it wasn't that I was apathetic towards what was going on. It's that I was just feeling everything and overwhelmed, and I kind of shut down. And that's said within 2 lines, within however many, 15 words at the end of the chorus. And it really tells you something that humans share and experience, and sometimes probably don't have the words to express. And so when you hear it in a song and you go, oh, you know what, I can relate to that. I can relate to those times when I'm just feeling so much that it's tough and I'm doing my best, but it probably comes across that I'm kind of ambivalent to what's going on, but that's not the case. And yeah, just said in 2 lines. There's another one, and I'll finish up by talking about this, because I think there's a lyric in there which paints such a picture, and I want to talk about that. So then another song on the album is called The Beginning, and this is one of the lyrics from the opening section of it. So the lyrics go, "But hold me close, because I want to feel your fire, like signals on the coast, and let it rage like the end of everything in this epoch, in this age." I didn't know what the word epoch meant before I heard this song. So epoch basically means a specific point in time, or a specific point in time in a person's life. I don't think I've come across the word epoch in another song. And even then, just pulling out a word that you wouldn't have necessarily used, the rest of it isn't that complicated in terms of it's quite easy to understand what's going on. You know, hold me close, I want to feel your fire, signals on the coast, and then you pull out the word epoch, and suddenly it just adds to, it's like putting a different color onto a painting. It's like, okay, let me just use the red, and oh, actually now I'm going to pull out the burgundy, and there's the epoch, and there's the stroke of the epoch. So this album, and what this feels like to me, is it's like listening to if a painting became a song, if a painting became an album. The album artwork, the lyrics, the story, the words that conjure up such specific imagery. And I just really loved this point of, you know, say like the end of everything in this epoch, in this age. And he could be talking about the world. He could be talking about global warming. He could be talking about himself and his emotion, but it's almost like a yes and within acting, where he's like, okay, I'm going to give you this word. I'm going to give you this section, and then you relate to it however you want to relate to it, and you build off that however you want to build off that. And I've given you the tools, you know, go and Bob Ross, go and paint your thing and have a lovely old time. So to be able to do that with both this album and an album from 20 years ago, and see that they're definitely both within the Snow Patrol discography, but they're so vastly different, it's incredible. It's being able to be that consistent whilst making so many different songs and doing it for years and changing band members, but there's somehow a level and a standard that Snow Patrol always managed to reach. And it doesn't matter if that's on their first album, the third album, or I think this was their 8th studio album. I think it was their 8th studio album. So to do that across that time is fantastic. And I definitely recommend listening to them. If you want an album to start with, I'd start with Eyes Open, because it's just iconic for them. And then I would jump to The Forest Is the Path. And then you kind of see the journey from almost the start to where they are at now. And then you can jump into everything in between. And maybe you've got your own opinion on whether you feel like it's a straight road to pit stops, or where it's a bunch of curved roads that goes around all through the middle of the Nevada desert. But tell me what you think on them. If you want some songs to start with, yeah, I'd definitely start with Chasing Cars, because it's just such an iconic song for them. And then the song Run as well. It's of a different album, but again, iconic song for them. There's so many Snow Patrol songs. Another, just for throwing it out there for a completely different vibe, listen to Called Out in the Dark. I watched the music video for it because it's great, and it really shows the range jumping from Chasing Cars to Called Out in the Dark, then jump to the new album, and off of the new album, listen to All, because that gives you that lyric that I spoke about earlier. So yeah, that should be plenty to get you started with. If you've heard of them and you love Snow Patrol, tell me what you love about them. Give me a shout on, comment and say what it is you think, why you think they're good, what it is that's consistent about them. If you hate them, tell me why you hate them. If you've not heard of them and you listen to this podcast and you listen to them and you find something with them, then great. That's the whole goal here. So yeah, give them a go and then tell me what you think afterwards. Beautiful. Thanks for listening to this episode. We'll be back again next week for episode 4. If you liked it, give me a like, give me a subscribe. If there's any bands that you want to see me talk about, or any albums you want to see me talk about or check out, I've already had some recommendations from the new subscribers, which is great. So yeah, drop me a message, give me a comment, give me a like, give me a subscribe, hit the bell button or whatever those YouTubers say, and then I'll see you again next week.